welcome to the Christianado podcast. Thank you for tuning in this week. We have a great show for you. We have a special guest lined up, Dr. Russell Moore.
Oh, I thought it was going to be me.
You'll be here too.
Okay.
But he will be talking with us in a moment. We have a giveaway we're doing right now for a free Kindle Fire on the website, and we'll put the details in the episode description here. But pay attention this episode because we will have a secret word pop up at some point that will increase your odds of winning that Kindle Fire. So I am Cray Allred. Across from me is a two-headed beast named Adam Murr / Dustin Lair.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
And we won't reveal which one's which. And
you'll have to guess.
To my left is Dr. Chris Allen.
And thank you. I am staring at a stack of books.
Do any of you guys have a diary entry, or do you want to do an icebreaker? Okay, I'm going to do an icebreaker.
Good work, guys.
Socks. What do we think about socks?
I appreciate how much sweat they soak up from my sweaty feet.
I think it's funny the evolution of socks. How sometimes the no-shows
we're Christians here.
Microevolution.
Microevolution
within a species. Like no-show used to be popular, and now they got those. I don't know what those basketball ones are called. You know,
tallerish.
The Fab Five wore the black socks. I like no-shows still, and maybe that just reveals my age.
One of the youth of our church, Zach Zitch, has a thing where he's now wearing 3 pairs of socks.
Good for him.
At a time.
Good
like
for him.
In layered heights so that you can see all the different colors.
And that's supposed to be cool?
Apparently.
I'm glad that now
only to him.
I'm glad that now a basic form of underwear is now an accessory. Like, socks are just underwear. Like, they're just another form. You wear them under something.
Socks as underwear?
Listen, dude, I got problems with stuff that I have to take care of.
And he's a big Chili Peppers fan.
Big Chili Peppers fan. No, but like, you're wearing it under something else. Like, it's not a showpiece, but now people are layering socks, and they're all kinds of crazy colors, and these daggum kids with their daggum socks.
I do enjoy a good fitting sock, though.
I will say that I used to have all kinds of painful foot trouble, and then I switched to 2 socks for sports, and it was great.
Has anyone in here ever worn a sock guard?
What is that?
What's that mean?
It would hold your socks up before they were elastic.
Whoa! No,
that's a thing?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't. It sounds really cool.
Well, you know the thing I want, which is the reverse of that for your shirt being tucked in, keeping it down.
Yes.
I told you I've seen something like that connects it to your socks.
You're up on fashion.
You could wear a onesie and just button it under your stuff.
It's a really
you should make onesie dress shirts.
Superman wears his outfit underneath his suit, and that's basically
There's some dress shirts that they make a super long tail on and actually put a button on the back. So, like, the last button of the shirt can come down and button in here so your shirt doesn't ride up.
A onesie.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a dress onesie.
Formal.
Okay, well, we'll work on that.
For those special baby occasions.
So, to all the listeners, you're welcome.
All right, so let's go ahead and get to our interview. Okay, well, our next guest is Russell Moore, Dr. Russell Moore, who is the new president of Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission for the Southern Baptist Convention. Someone we really have respected from a distance for a long time. I'm very excited to have him on. Welcome to the show, Dr. Moore.
Good to be with you.
And we'd like to do, before we get to the real questions, we like to do icebreakers on the show.
Okay.
So we have some icebreakers for you. First, what is your favorite scripture?
My favorite scripture is in the Luke passage of the thief on the cross saying, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom," which is going to be on my the headstone of my grave one day.
That works. And what is your favorite color?
Blue.
And your favorite Dixie chick?
I don't have a favorite Dixie chick.
That's the correct answer. That was a trick question.
Okay.
Like we said, your new position is president of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. And so we're all Southern Baptists, by the way, and 2/3 of us here are also adoptive fathers, so you're definitely on our radar
great.
for a long time now. So I'm curious exactly, the extent of my understanding of your position is the political voice of the Southern Baptist Convention. Is that an accurate description of what you're doing? Or do you do any technical lobbying? Expound on what it is you're supposed to be doing.
We do 2 things.
Okay.
The first thing that we do is to equip churches, speak to churches and to Christians about ethical and moral issues. So everything from hunger to infertility treatments to living wills to thinking through homosexuality, everything that has to do with the ethical and religious liberty issues before congregations and families and churches, to help them to think through those things. So adoption, for instance, would be one of those things. We're equipping churches to think through, how do we as a church, how do we as a family, how do I as an individual care for widows and orphans? What are the ethical issues we need to think through? What are the theological issues we need to think through? And so forth. And the same thing would apply to the whole range of questions. And then secondly, we speak for the churches in the public arena. So that means advocacy with political leaders, dealing with questions of religious liberty. A lot of my time is spent with members of Congress or with the White House or with foreign governments, dealing with questions that we're concerned about providing for freedom of conscience, about hearing our voice on any number of things. So both of those 2 aspects is what we've been assigned to do.
And you described kind of your vision for our role in that environment these days as a prophetic minority.
Right.
Would you care to kind of explain to our audience what you mean by that?
Yeah, what I mean is that we no longer live in the sort of world where we can pretend to be a moral majority. There was a time when evangelical Christians particularly thought that American society was a Christian America, that most people in the culture share our values, and that we're really taking American values and adding Jesus to it. That is clearly, if that ever were the case, and I don't think it ever was, if it ever was a reality, it no longer is. And so we're living in the sort of culture where what we need is the contrast of what Christianity is. There was a time where a lot of what we were doing in our public voice was to show how evangelical Christianity is more normal than you think. We're just like other Americans. We're salt of the earth. We're all of these things. Now I think we're returning to a time which is much more typical in the history of the church, of demonstrating the freakishness of Christianity. The early church, you have people who are hearing the gospel, and their immediate reaction is to say, "You've lost your mind. This doesn't make any sense to us at all. You're saying a dead man is not only alive again, but he's now the ruler of the entire universe? That sounds crazy." Well, that sort of reaction is exactly the scandal of the gospel, that is the power of God and salvation. So as American culture starts to move away from Christianity as a normal cultural phenomenon, which hides a lot of nominal, unregenerate Christianity, then we're able to, I think, truly be the church and truly show the contrast of what we are. I often tell people about a friend of mine that I had in college who was an atheist. He and I would talk about the claims of Christ often. And one day he said to me, "Can you recommend a Southern Baptist church for me to join that's not too Southern Baptisty?" And my first response was to say, "Oh, you've come to Christ. Wait, how did you come to Christ?" He said, "Oh, I'm not a Christian at all." He said, "But I want a political career one day, and I know the demographics of the state. I really need to be a member of a Southern Baptist church." Now, there was an entire Bible Belt built off of that sort of impulse. Often not as overt as that, maybe not often even as self-conscious as that. But there was this Bible Belt mentality that said joining a church and being a born again Christian in some parts of this country was just part of settling down. That's not the picture of the new birth that we see in the New Testament. So I think a post-Christian society is really going to enable born again Christians to be born again. And I think that's going to be a good thing for the church.
Dr. Moore, this is Dustin. First of all, thank you for your answer. I really believe, it's sad in a way that Christianity is being marginalized, but I think historically it thrives on the margins. So I really appreciate that. I'm a pastor of a local church, so it's a small rural church in Missouri. So it's kind of hard for me to think big picture sometimes, because I'm managing the day to day. What do you believe is the biggest issue facing the church over the next 10 years? I mean, what do you have to do with me?
Well, I think that's going to depend from place to place as to what the biggest issue facing a particular congregation is going to be. I think the sexuality issues are going to be tremendously huge for every congregation, and there is not going to be any bubble that any church can escape into and say, oh, well, because we're in rural Missouri, we're not going to be affected by these sexuality debates. Yes, you will. Because we're headed to an American culture where same-sex marriage is coming to all 50 states. And what that means is that we're going to have congregations who are going to be able, who are going to have to be able to explain marriage. And that doesn't simply mean saying, we believe in marriage, and we believe that people ought to be a man and a woman in a marriage, and we believe that that man and the woman ought to be committed to one another. You're going to have to start at a very basic level of talking through why marriage is an issue of the common good, and why marriage is a gospel issue, which means starting all over again. There was a time when a lot of churches could come in and say to lost people, if you come to Christ, your marriage is going to be healthier. That's actually one of the advantages of Christianity. We can help you get your faltering marriage back together. And everybody had a common understanding of at least what marriage was. Mm-hmm. Even if there wasn't a Christ-like marriage, at least we knew what marriage was. Well, that day is coming to a close. Now what the church is going to have to articulate is, why is marriage important at all? What ought marriage to look like? And to be able to speak on the other side of people who are going to be really, really disappointed with the marriage revolution happening all around them. Which means we're going to have to create countercultures within our own congregations that are picturing something very different to the outside world of what we mean about marriage and sexuality. Now, that comes at the same time that there are going to be tremendous, tremendous challenges coming from the use of technology. What does it mean to be human in this sort of a world where through technology not only can we conceive children outside of one flesh union, technology can end life in ways that we've previously never seen before, but also just the way that technology continues to change us and to change our interactions with one another. For instance, you think about the question of pornography. Pornography has always been with us since the fall. Mm-hmm. You can see pornography in virtually every human culture. But now, because of technology, pornography has been weaponized. Someone doesn't have to slip into an adult movie theater or go and go behind a curtain back in the back of some video store. Instead, pornography is accessible to 11-year-old kids through their iPhones and iPads immediately. And so congregations are going to have to deal with, how do we counsel people who are about to be married who have been immersed in pornography for sometimes 10, 11, 12, 15 years, since they were very, very small children, and their entire sexual scripts have been written around that. That's only going to intensify. The next wave of porn probably isn't going to be image-based solely. It's probably going to be a full immersive sensory experience where someone can have the equivalent of a chat room relationship with someone in a way that entirely mimics a sexual experience. I mean, how is the church going to deal with that? and with the wreckage that comes after that. I think every congregation in America is going to have to deal with that.
Wow, that's terrifying, actually, when I think about it.
Yeah.
A moment ago, you mentioned your conversation with your atheist roommate. How do you feel? I mean, obviously that impacted you. How do you feel God has prepared you for your current position? I mean, how has He groomed you, even from childhood, with your experiences for what you're doing now?
Well, I think all of us in our lives and ministries at some point can look back and we can see all of these times that we believed were cul-de-sacs, where we were kind of wasting time. And it seems like, well, I'm doing this. It doesn't really fit with what I'm doing. So there was a time when I suppose I could have looked back and said, those years when I was working in the political arena really weren't contributing to my life in ministry, but they were. And so what God has used is life in the political arena, life in the journalistic arena, life in the local congregation as a pastor and as a youth pastor and in various other ways, being in the classroom, in the academy, and put all of those things together. So I think what in anybody's ministry, I think what God tends to do is to take the interests and the experiences that you have, and He embeds those things in your life and ministry for a reason. Sometimes even things that happened before you were a Christian. I mean, think about the Apostle Paul, who his studies with Gamaliel, his attention to the Old Testament law, all of those things in the fullness of time God used in terms of his apostolic ministry. And all of us, to a much lesser degree, God does that, I think, in our lives. And so sometimes I will have somebody who has been called to ministry, and he says, but I spent all this time working on this law degree, or I spent all this time working in the seafood industry, or spent all this time as a songwriter or a musician or whatever. God typically has something in mind for that person that's going to take all of those interests and all of those experiences and put them together in a way that makes sense for you. And I think that's what's happened with me.
Good, and we hope our listeners are encouraged by that, because they listen to a cul-de-sac of a podcast every week, and and our guests too. We extend that to you, so be encouraged by your own words.
Hello, Dr. Moore. This is Chris, and I'm one of the adoptive parents. I'm also a foster parent, so I wanted to say thank you. And and we'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, but your book, Adopted for Life, very clearly articulated many of the gospel-centric thoughts that I've always felt inside my heart about adoption. And so I wanted to take this opportunity to personally thank you for giving that gift to the church.
Oh, well, that's very kind. Thank you.
So my first question is, what do you miss most about seminary and being there and being part of that community?
Well, I really haven't had the opportunity to miss anything yet, because I have been on seminary and university campuses constantly. So I really haven't given up anything. I've just instead transferred my ministry from one seminary to a dozen.
To many.
And so I really haven't had an opportunity to miss that, because I'm on seminaries. I was on the campus of Golden Gate Seminary Friday, and then spent a lot of time with my former students who are there in the Bay Area. One of them who's serving in ministry drove me to the next place I was going to go, about 3 hours away, and I really had an opportunity to spend a lot of time with him and hearing about what's going on in his life. So I really haven't ended anything. We've just kind of continued it in a different way.
Well, good. Thank you for that. We have a good friend who was actually at Southern when you were there. His name was Craig Carmack, and I told him that you were going to come on the show today, and he said that he emailed you some really weird email like last Sunday, and you responded within hours.
Okay. I don't remember what that was about.
Great story.
It must not have been too weird. Or I remembered it.
No.
You're dealing with seminary students. You probably get a lot of weird stuff.
Oh yeah, and from elsewhere too.
All right, we're gonna pivot and then specifically talk to you about adoption because with your wealth of information and then with the time you've spent thinking through that. So first off, we'd like to hear what you think through adopting your boys. What has that taught you about God and His character?
Well, the primary thing is the nature of the fatherhood of God. I was, of course, very familiar with those passages in Scripture that deal with the fact that we have been adopted as sons. I had preached Romans 8. I had preached Galatians 4. And to me, that was in the category of metaphor. And that was completely transformed when we went through the process of adopting our sons, because what happened was God showed me my own sin in my resistance. If you had interviewed me in 2001 and said, tell me what you think about adoption, I would have given you this whole series of paragraphs about why Christians ought to adopt and why adoption's a good thing, and it would have come out of my pro-life convictions, which I held then. But when it actually came to the moment when my wife said to me, I think maybe God is calling us to adopt, my first response was to say, oh, I think that'd be a great thing to do later on, but first I really think we ought to have our own kids, was the words that I used. So I didn't understand Galatians 4 in Romans 8, because I had this category in my mind of biological children and adopted children, where adopted children are kind of a secondary plan B sort of child. And what the adoption process showed me by demolishing that in my own heart and loving these two sons and bringing them into our family in this way is the fatherhood of God, that in adopting, He's not giving an act of charity. He's instead extending love. And that was something I think that changed radically through this process.
Thank you for the answer. And one thing that I really appreciate about adoption and you being kind of at the forefront of this movement that we have inside of evangelicalism is that adoption is really a very important principle, I think, in Christianity. And I think it was one of the tenets of the Reformation. And I think that, kind of our milieu of Western Christianity has lost that idea. And I think one of the ways that we can really be intentional about taking that back theologically is also taking that back literally, with, widow and orphan care, as we can say, this is what it looks like. You said it's not an act of charity. This is what love looks like. And this is what God's love for us looks like.
Well, and what adoption does is to bridge both the legal and the relational aspects of what it means to be a child of God and what it means to be reconciled to God. So we have those more legal categories: justification, kind of a courtroom sort of image, and then we have those more relational categories of sanctification, where we're growing into the image of Christ. Adoption bridges those two things, because you have a legal declaration: you are not slaves, you are sons. Your legal category has changed. In the same way that a family going through an adoption process, there comes a moment where a judge says, this is now your son, these are now your parents. It's a legal declaration. But there also is that relational aspect. The adoption doesn't end at that legal declaration. It continues in the relationship between the father and child. And we get to see a picture of that in the families that God brings together, and also in loving orphans and bringing orphans into families. We're reminded of the fact that we're not Darwinists, that love is not simply a matter of protecting our genetic material. It's much bigger and broader than that, and that keeps pointing us back to the kingdom of God and to what God is doing.
Dr. Moore, this is Dustin again. Thank you so much. My wife and I have adopted 6 kids through foster care, and it all occurred before we had our first biological child, which he'll turn a 1-year-old next month. And if she had to
Okay.
hear one more time, when are you going to have your own, I think she would have killed somebody.
Yeah, sure.
It bothers her.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. You know, as a pastor, we're going to consider international adoption at some point. I mean, I guess we've already considered it. But in our climate where we live, in our area, culture, if I say something like that, the tendency, what I hear is, well, we should take care of our own kids first. And they don't mean biological, they mean American.
Right.
So first, should that tick me off? Because it does. Second, I know as a pastor I have to overcome some levels of things I disagree with, but how should I address that?
Well, I think you should use it as a teaching opportunity, because what really is at the root of that is the same sort of thing that you see when it comes to, for instance, missions. You have people who want to categorize into either-ors that the Bible just doesn't allow. So you will have people who will say, for instance, why in the world would we be sending missionaries all around the world when we have lost people all around our own churches and our own communities? Or people who would say, why would we be spending time ministering to people in our community, in the most Christianized area of Missouri or wherever we are, when we have people around the world who've never even heard the gospel at all? Well, that's a false either-or that's in front of you. And it gives you a picture that the New Testament doesn't give at all, as though you ought to evangelize and see to it that everybody in your neighborhood is saved before you take the gospel to the nations, or that you ought to just stop doing ministry in your community in order to take the gospel to the nations. No, you do both, and you do both simultaneously. And so sometimes you will hear people who will say, we've got our own kids to deal with. Why should we worry with those who are overseas? And then I also will hear people saying, well, why on earth would we be participating in foster care and in adopting kids domestically when even the worse off kids domestically in the United States are still better off than the best off kids in some countries and some of these orphanages? Let's give priority to them. Well, you don't do either of those things. You do both. We minister to children in our neighborhoods, and we minister to children around the world. If Jesus had had this attitude, then we would all be in hell right now. Because if the attitude had simply been, let's just deal with our own here within the 12 tribes of Israel, and let's just minister there and share the gospel there before we start worrying about these who are scattered about the Gentiles, then most of us who are here on this telephone call, who are of Gentile biological background, would not have received the gospel.
Right.
What does Jesus do? He takes the gospel to the Jew first. That doesn't mean that he waits until every Israelite is converted before he takes the gospel to the Gentiles. It's that he starts there in Jerusalem and takes the message all around the world. Same thing is true when it comes to ministering to kids. The worst thing that we can do is to start pitting the people who are ministering to kids overseas from the people who are ministering to kids through foster care, from the people who are ministering to kids through domestic adoption. God has called us to a multitude of different callings, and we need all of those things. So usually what you're hearing when you hear people saying that, sometimes you're hearing some nativism and racism involved in that.
Yes.
That needs to be confronted with the gospel. Sometimes you're just hearing the same sort of thing that you hear with what the Apostle Paul confronts in the Corinthian church, of people who want to contrast different gifts and callings with one another. Well, speaking in tongues is superior to
everybody
to
knows
preaching
that's
or
not true.
whatever. So anyway, you have to confront that, and I think use it as a teaching opportunity.
That's better than just getting mad. Thank you very much. Can I ask you, what do you think the future of international adoption is? I mean, there have been some bad situations and circumstances. Do you think it'll be easier in the future or more difficult?
Well, I think that in some cases it is becoming more difficult in the right ways, so that you have the international community becoming much more attuned to dealing with abuses that have happened in some places with trafficking and other things, doing a much better job with that in some places. Also in dealing with root causes, and that's what we have to be asking is, what's causing the orphan crisis in a particular place? And so we not only deal with the kids that are there now who need families, but we also say, how do we prevent this from happening in the future? Is this because of poverty? Is this because of war? Is this because of genocide? Is it because of disease? And we deal with all of those root causes as well. And so I think that in some ways it's appropriately difficult in some places. In other ways, I think it is inappropriately difficult in ways that harm kids. So you think of, for instance, what's going on in Russia, where my sons are from, where there are orphanages filled with children, and the response from many Russian political leaders is kind of exactly the sort of thing that you mentioned a few minutes ago. Let's keep these foreigners out of here and tell them to mind their own business. That actually would be okay if there were a thriving adoption culture in Russia. There's not. So you wind up with orphanages full of kids who simply age out of the system into suicide or substance abuse, prostitution. And so I think that in those places where the state is being predatory on kids, a lot of us are calling on those governments to deal with this in any number of ways. And I really think, I really have an optimistic view of where that's going to go, because governments that are neglecting their own children ultimately have to deal with the social problems that are left over from that. And so I think there's going to be a reconsideration. This is how do we deal with this? And there's some legislation now in the United States Congress. There's some efforts being done to be able to make that easier overseas. I think that's where things are going. I really think that you're going to see a better balance in the next 10 years when it comes to international adoption.
Awesome. All right, Dr. Moore, are you up for a little rapid fire?
Sure.
We don't have a buzzer, so we won't shock you if your answers are too long. But we're just going to run through some for you. Now, you've done the Crossing the Jukebox podcast. Is that something that's going to continue?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Sure is.
All right, and so for those who don't know, that's you pick a country song and you really dig into the values and the message behind the song and relate it to the audience. So my question, do you think, which has worse, more damaging values in general, contemporary mainstream country music or contemporary mainstream hip-hop?
I think it's hard to say which has a worse perspective. I think in some ways, country music is a little bit ahead because they will at least honor things like marriage that lasts a long time. So you think of, for instance, a Conway Twitty song, "Darling, How I Love to Lay You Down," that's talking about how this guy really wants to have sex with his wife, who has now gray hair and is in her house coat in the kitchen, and he's still attracted to her. That's a viewpoint you don't hear in any other genre of music in the contemporary era, and is rooted in something that's really good. On the other hand, country music is in some ways worse than any form of hip hop, because a lot of it hides behind an almost gospel that's really dangerous. And you can hear that. I'm a Willie Nelson fan, and one of the things you can hear at almost any Willie Nelson concert is Whiskey River going right into Amazing Grace. That's rooted in that Bible Belt phenomenon we talked about earlier. That's much more dangerous than just straight out hostility to Christianity that you can find in some other genres of music. But I think hip hop and country music are very similar.
I agree with
that. There's a lot of similarity between the two.
Okay, would you rather be adopted by Charles Spurgeon, John Bunyan, Billy Graham, Lottie Moon, Willie Nelson, or Dolly Parton?
Oh, goodness.
You can pick two.
Well, I wouldn't.
You can have a mom and a dad.
I wouldn't want to be adopted by John Bunyan because Dad would always be in prison.
He's a deadbeat.
You spin me right round, Jesus, right round, like a record, Jesus, right round, round, round.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, the secret word for today is
Bunyan. Why don't we do this? Why don't I say I would like to be adopted by Charles Spurgeon as my dad and Dolly Parton as my mom?
Perfect.
What a fiery couple.
that would be a lively marriage. Yes.
Yes, it would.
Okay, who is the better Baptist? Jimmy Carter, Cornel West,
I'm Holy Ghost Funky Gut Bucket Baptist.
or Carrie Underwood? Or you can rank them 1 through 3.
Yeah. I guess I'd have to say Carrie Underwood. She's a member of a church here in Nashville, and I don't know her, so I don't know her spiritual situation and her heart. Cornel West, of course, is way. He's a very personally engaging person, but holds to some really dangerous ideas theologically. And of course, Jimmy Carter resigns from the Southern Baptist Convention once a year. So it's kind of like people they dedicate their lives. He undedicates his life every year. So I guess I'll have to go with Carrie Underwood.
All right. As you would imagine, we're all a little bit too plugged into the blogosphere and the, potosphere, whatever it's called. But we see how prolific Al Mohler is on top of all of his seminary duties. And we've come to a conclusion. You being an insider, you would have a very specific insight into this. Do you think there's a chance that Al Mohler is actually a robot?
I would think that might be the case, except that I cannot tell you how many times we have been in conversations in which he has gone to sleep.
He wasn't charged up. He wasn't fully charged.
If he is a robot, then he's got an iOS 7.
Ooh, slam! Computers have sleep mode, though. Maybe he just has a sleep mode.
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah.
All right, well that's it from us. So again, thank you so much for coming on and answering all our questions, and we do really respect everything you're doing, and we have very high hopes for your new role in our convention.
Well, thanks so much, and Lord's blessings to y'all.
Thank you, Dr. Moore.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so good interview with the highly esteemed Dr. Moore there. You guys have any other gushing you want to do for him now that he's gone? Or any insults you're too cowardly to say to his face?
I am so sorry that he had to be on our podcast.
He is smarter than he is handsome.
And he's really handsome.
Mm-hmm.
One time I heard him say that he was going to physically assault Andrew Peterson if he ever made fun of country music again.
Ooh.
It was really funny. And I think it was actually on Willie Nelson's birthday that it happened. It was pretty charged.
That could have been a massacre.
I think I heard him talk about Dungeons and Dragons one time.
No, are you being serious?
No, seriously.
Oh, really?
I loved him ever since.
All right, so let's do a blog down. This week on the docket, whatever you want to call it. I think you call it a blog. Dustin, you're going to be doing some preacher spotlights.
So I'm highlighting some guys that aren't celebrities but still are worth your listen.
So like
Deepak Chopra, right? Like that kind of stuff?
Mainly like myself 5 times.
Who's this guy, Dustin Lair?
I only kid.
And also last week, we want to talk about last week's blog post that Chris did for Christian holograms. So the listeners that haven't read it, there's this hologram thing taking over in the concert sphere, the tour sphere, where they're resurrecting dead hip hop performers with holograms on stage, and they've done Tupac.
Like Ja Rule.
And Tupac, Eazy-E have been the most recent ones. So Chris did one, dead. And he started a series we're going to start doing, which is like, what if? So we have quote unquote Christian music or Christian mimes or Christian whatever. We said,
We
what
have
if-
a lot of Christian mimes.
What if they were Christian hologram tour circuits? And so, like, if we put deceased or past preachers on stage for Christian audiences to enjoy, and you selected John Edwards first
Edwards first because of his powdered wig,
and
then Piper and Keller because they're hand gestures.
But they're not dead.
they're not dead. Neither is Mark Driscoll, who we also picked.
Listen.
So you were going with the preserved for posterity.
Yeah.
It's like they could pastor a satellite church basically with a hologram.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah.
I get it.
Which they would all support too.
So who else would we like to see on a stage, holographically?
So are we going for like?
It's whatever you want.
Okay.
This is what if.
Adrian Rogers is one of my favorite modern dead guys.
Too soon.
Yeah.
Too soon.
Sorry.
You're a monster.
Oh, so you just want him like an actual, just straightforward preaching setting, Adrian Rogers.
Yeah, I like Adrian Rogers.
Adam, you got any?
No.
Spurgeon almost made the cut because, I mean, like, it's not cold in London, right? I mean, it's like warm in London. And that guy was super fat, and he wore like 18 layers of mid-century clothing, and he would shout sermons all day long. And I would like to see the pool of sweat that developed around this man, like a sweat halo, when he was preaching to his
He
congregation.
was very opinionated about things like scarves too.
Yeah.
He'd be a good one.
I'd like to see. You mentioned possibility of like Old Testament folks.
Oh yeah, it'd be pretty good to see Moses.
John the
bring in
Baptist
somebody.
might be pretty sweet.
Yes.
Ezekiel,
Naked
Ezekiel, eating
Laying
his
on
poop.
the ground.
Yeah, looking at his poop on his pants.
I would like to see angry mountain constrained Elijah fighting with God. That would have been a good one.
Samson with hair, Samson post hair.
That'd be interesting.
That'd
to
be
see.
Goliath would be a
That
good
could be
one.
on like a cable show,
Yeah.
like your before and after.
Yeah, like a Jerry Springer one.
We
That's
can do
good.
some Jerry Springer.
That's good.
All right, I think we've exhausted this. Unless
No.
our audience, if
No,
you have
this is
more,
great. This
put
is
them
so
in the
great.
I could
comments.
go for a long time.
So check out that blog. We'll be posting more today, and we will see you later. The music featured on the Christianado podcast is from Spooky Cheddar. You can find more of their music at spookycheddar.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. You can also check us out at The Christianado on Twitter and Facebook, or email us at thechristianado@gmail.com.